Myself, Dr. R.R. Sanap, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Botany, Rao Bahadur Narayan Rao Baroke College, Rampur. Today, I am going to deliver the lecture on the methods of drug evaluation. It is the part of syllabus of T.Y.B.Sc Botany, paper 4th, that is BO 344, and title of the paper is the Medicinal and Economic Botany. So let us see about the methods of drug evaluation. So first let us see what is meant by the drug evaluation. So this drug evaluation, it is nothing but the confirmation and identification and determination of quality and purity of crude drugs. So thus here, in this drug evaluation, the confirmation of the identification and determination of the quality and purity of the crude drug is carried out. So many times what happens, these crude drugs, they get adulterated. Crude drugs, they get adulterated, and it is confirmed whether that crude drug it is adulterated by different substitute drugs or substitute things. And so for the confirmation of the purity and its quality, this drug evaluation is very essential. So why these crude drugs, they are evaluated? So this evaluation is necessary. So why it is necessary? So it is very essential, very necessary to evaluate the crude drug due to the three important things or three important points. First is the biochemical variation in crude drugs. Biochemical variations. So many times what happens, the crude drugs, they are showing variable constituents of the crude drugs due to the adulteration, and due to it the purity of that crude drug it get degraded. So for that purpose, to confirm the biochemical constituents, that is purity of the biochemical constituents of that crude drug it should be evaluated. So for confirmation of the biochemical variation, the crude drug it is evaluated. Second thing is that so there is a possibility of deterioration of crude drugs. So this deterioration it may take place due to the treatment and the storage. Many times these crude drugs, they are treated with the different types of the chemicals, and due to this there is a possibility of deterioration of that crude drugs. So thus here, due to the treatment, this quality of crude drug, it may get degraded, and sometimes when that crude drugs, they are stored in the different types of containers or the different types of the warehouses. So during that period, there is a possibility of the deterioration or the degradation of the crude drug, and so due to this also the evaluation of crude drug is very essential, or it is very necessary. And third important thing due to which that crude drug it should be evaluated is the addition of substitute materials. Addition of the substitute materials in that crude drug. And due to the addition of these crude drugs, that crude drugs, they get adulterated. They get adulterated. And this adulteration, it degrades the quality and also the purity of this crude drug, and this due to the substitution of that crude drug, as the quality it may get degraded, but it is carried out sometimes the purposely, sometimes carelessness, sometimes due to the ignorance, sometimes ignorantly, that crude drugs, they get adulterated by adding the different types of the substitutes. Sometimes carelessly that crude drugs, they get adulterated. Sometimes it's for increasing the quantity or the weight, that crude drug, it is adulterated. It means for the fraud purpose, that crude drug, they get adulterated. And so due to this, all these things, that crude drug, as they get adulterated, so to confirm the purity, whether that crude drug it is adulterated or not, so to confirm the purity, that or to evaluate whether they are pure or any substitute materials are added, so for that purpose, that crude drugs, it should be evaluated. So thus here, for these three reasons, the crude drugs, they are evaluated. First is the biochemical variation in crude drug. Second thing is that there is a possibility of deterioration of the crude drug due to the treatment, or sometimes the due to the storage and the addition of substitute. It may be carelessly, or sometimes maybe due to the fraud or due to the ignorance, that crude drugs, they get adulterated, and to confirm it, this crude drug, it should be evaluated. Now let us see about the how that crude drugs they are evaluated. Firstly, initially at the beginning, these crude drugs, they are evaluated or identified its purity or its standardness by comparison with the standard literature. So at that time there was no the different methods which are adopted nowadays. So during the early period, that crude drugs, these are identified its purity on the basis of the comparison with the standard literature. So that crude drugs are taken, standard literature is referred, and on that basis the purity of that crude drug, it is evaluated. But nowadays, so there are different types of chemical methods, different things nowadays they are present recently, and these crude drugs nowadays they are evaluated on the basis of the chemical test. That is the active principles or active principle, that is the chemical content of that crude drug, it is identified on the basis of the different types of the chemical test. Now let us see about how these crude drugs, they are evaluated. So the evaluation morphological, so there are different methods. First let us see about the morphological or organoleptic evaluation of crude drugs. Morphological or organoleptic evaluation of the crude drug. So here the crude drugs, they are evaluated on the basis of the morphological characters. So the morphological characters like the color. So many crude drugs, on the basis of its color, that crude drugs, they are identified. Say for example, the clove, or maybe the umbelliferous fruits like fennel, coriander, then bark of some plants like the cinnamon, or the fruits like the cardamom. So such type of crude drugs, they are identified morphologically on the basis of its color. Many times these drugs, they are exhausted, its volatile oil is extracted, and that crude drug, when they become exhausted, then its color changes. And if we see original crude drug and exhausted crude drug, they show the variation in the color. So on the basis of the color, the crude drugs, they are morphologically evaluated. Second is the odor. So many times, if we see the odor, some crude drugs, they are having the specific smell or odor. And if that crude drugs, its volatile oil is extracted, and that exhausted drug, if we see, it shows the odor which is similar to the original one, but its odor, its severity, it is low. And so by comparing this original one and this exhausted drug, that crude drugs, they are evaluated whether they are original one or exhausted, or whether any substitute is added. So on the basis of the odor, it is evaluated. Next is the taste. So many times, if we see these different types of crude drugs, if suppose the substitute is added, for example the bark of the cinnamon, so if the bark of the other plant, it is added in it and its quantity is increased, so if we taste it, which is duplicate one, which is adulterated, its taste is differ from the original one. The another example, that is the licorice. So if we see the stem of the licorice, it is sweet in taste. If sometimes such type of stem sticks, if they are added in it and that drug, it is adulterated, and if we take the taste of that adulterated material, then it is completely different from the licorice stem. So on the basis of the taste also, that crude drugs, they are morphologically evaluated. Then second is the size. So many times on the basis of the size, so each crude drug, maybe it is from particularly from the maybe the fruit, then the seed or leaf drugs, if they are present, each that crude drug, it is having the specific shape and size. But if suppose that crude drug, it is adulterated by different substitutes, then on the basis of the size, its purity, it is identified. Then also on the basis of the shape. Shape, it is also the important parameter. By observing the shape of the crude drug, original one and the adulterated one or substitute, then on the basis of the shape also the crude drugs, they are adulterated. Then with the help of touch and texture, the crude drugs, they are evaluated. So in this evaluation, that crude drugs, they are handled. So if we touch it and if we observe its texture, then also the crude drugs, these are evaluated morphologically. Simply one example, if we see the cinnamomum bark, Cinnamomum zeylanicum. If we see the bark of this plant, and if the other bark of that plant, other plant, it is added in it, if we observe the texture, then it is completely differentiated. So thus, by observing the texture and its touching, the crude drugs, these are identified. Then the organoleptic evaluation, it is the conclusion which is drawn due to the impression of the organ of the sense. So the fracture crude drugs like the bark, wood, so that fracture crude drugs, these are identified by the touching or just impression on the sense. Then the other aromatic crude drugs like the umbelliferous fruits, maybe the fennel or coriander or the licorice, so such type of crude drugs. So they are also evaluated on the basis of the organoleptic evaluation. So thus here these are the some methods of the drug evaluation, whether that drug these are adulterated or whether they are pure. So I am going to conclude here. Thank you very much.